Hey guys, Nyxarity here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make Yarny. Isn't he cute? But yeah, so just some basic things that you're going to need. You're going to want some thread, preferably in red. Stitching needles, obviously. You can also use a sewing machine for this, but the plush that I made was too small to use a sewing machine, so I hand stitched everything. You're obviously going to want a pair of scissors. Some scrap fabric, preferably in red, but my scrap fabric is muslin. Works absolutely fine. Some stuffing so that you can make your Yarny a plushie. Some red yarn, obviously, and some white yarn. For this tutorial, you're going to want to make a pattern. I will go ahead and show you my pattern pieces and how I laid them out on my fabric, and that's about it. So here we have the pattern pieces that I cut out for the Yarny tutorial. They are the head, the body, the arms, and the legs. And I just wanted to make sure I had 2 sets of legs. So there's 4 legs total, and there's 4 arms total. 2 bodies, so that you've got each side, and then 2 heads. Here you can see a little bit closer of each of the pattern pieces that I used, in case you felt like copying it for your own uses. Now, this pattern did turn out a little bit small for being able to stuff it to make it an actual plush, so if you'd like to make your own, I would suggest making them a little bit bigger than what I have. Each of the pattern pieces for the head and the body, well, the head specifically is about the size of my hand. And the body pieces, as you can see in proportion here, are a little bit smaller. Here you can see each of my pattern pieces all cut out. I wanted to go ahead and put them together for you so you could see. You want to have your lines on the outside so that you can go ahead and sew up the edges. And here's the body for you guys. Again, I did the same thing so you could see. Obviously, you want to see both of your lines on the outside so that you know where you want to sew. And here are the legs. You can see I've got my 4 pieces here, and when I put those together, they will go ahead and make 2 whole legs. The other thing I would recommend here is extending the foot section a little bit farther on the legs, just so that you've got a little bit more area to work with for wrapping. As well as the hands, if you want to have the kind of more bulb end that Yarny has kind of to his hands, I would go ahead and make that actually a little bit rounder there on the outside, or you're just going to have to worry about wrapping the yarn just a little bit extra on the ends of the hands. But there you have your 2 arms. Here you can see I've got all of the pieces sewn together. I just did a quick stitch to hold the pieces together here on the head and on the legs. You can see the same thing, and the arms. I did leave sections open so that I could go ahead and stuff them. And the body here I did what's called a blanket stitch on, which will actually keep the fabric together a little bit better so that the stuffing won't come out. I did go ahead and go through afterwards and stitched up all of the edges on all of the pieces, like the body, so it's a blanket stitch on all of the edges, but the sides of them had to come down a little bit so that I actually had an edge to work with there. And I did go ahead and leave those pieces open at the bottom, or at the tops of the legs and the tops of the arms and the bottom of the head, just so that you could see, just so you get the stuffing in there. But again, here's a little bit closer on the blanket stitch. If you want a tutorial on that, I'm sure you can find one online very, very simply. There's all the pieces. Here I've got the pieces stuffed. The ends of them are still open because I wanted to go ahead and just stitch everything together and not worry about using extra thread to go ahead and stitch those closed before I just stitched them to the body. I did have some spots where the fabric started fraying where I stitched because I stuffed it, so I did have to go back in and stitch up some of those edges just to make sure that the stuffing wouldn't peek out through the yarn when I wrapped it. But as you can see, all of my edges here that I left open for the stuffing are still open, and I went through and I just sewed all of the pieces of the body together so that you had a whole plush. And there you go. Body of Yarny. And here, I went ahead and I sewed on pieces of the yarn on the edges where I made a yarn version and had trouble keeping the ends of it looking wrapped. And here's just a high speed of me wrapping all of Yarny in yarn. And I did go through a couple of different methods here, realizing that the head, I probably didn't have to wrap the ends of the ears, because those probably would end up being covered by the method that I found worked best for wrapping, which is just kind of wrapping one side from the side of the neck to the top of the ear, and then doing the same thing on the other side, and then coming back and wrapping around the ears to connect to the full head, which even gives the full effect of the pattern that Yarny kind of has in the game, where his head looks a little bit wrapped. A couple of these pieces I did have to sew down to the doll just to make sure that they wouldn't come up, because I have had problems of my wire wrapping, where yarn pieces have moved and, decided that they wanted to unwrap. And, the less bulk that you have trying to wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap to keep your ends from coming up, the better. But as you can see, I just keep wrapping, and more pieces of yarn that I have to pull out and cut and all that. I'm sure somebody with more skill and maybe more time could go ahead and just wrap and wrap and wrap from the ball or tube of yarn that they have, but it worked better for me to work in pieces. It also helped me keep from getting Yarny wrapped with too much yarn, because the more yarn that you wrap with, the stiffer the plush becomes, and if you want small children to be able to play with this, you want him to stay as squishy as possible, because those seams can get hard in and of themselves, and just with the bulk amount of yarn to keep the base covered it just gets really stiff really quickly. If you want a little bit less worry about how much you have to wrap to keep the base from being shown, I would recommend finding a fabric that matches the color of the red yarn that you're using, and then a thread as well for your seams that matches. That way you don't have to worry so much about extra showing. But what I had on hand at home was white, because of all of the scrap projects that I've had, so that just worked best for me. The other thing I would recommend, if you're planning on doing this in the future, that I didn't do, and will do in the future if I make more Yarny dolls, is that I made each of the pieces separately for Yarny, and I would make them a little bit bigger, but I would also use my sewing machine to just kind of make basically a whole body and just leave like part of the side of his body open to be able to just stuff all of him. That way you've got a little bit less worry about, like with this specific plush, where he just kind of had a little bit too much of a neck for me and didn't quite look so much like the actual Yarny in the game, whereas the wire one did look a lot more like the Yarny in the game. But yeah, so I just kind of tied some of the pieces when I wrapped them, or, stitched them down, or just kept wrapping, because honestly, when you get it wrapped enough, it's going to stay in place no matter what you do to it. The other thing I had a problem with, specifically for filming this, is just you get so into the wrapping process that I almost forgot sometimes to make sure that it was within the view of the camera, so that you guys could actually see it. The other thing that was difficult is getting the legs wrapped, because Yarny does kind of seem to have a little bit of like a hip type area right above his legs, so getting that to work, because there was a gap between his legs, obviously. But getting that hip area wrapped, you know, I had to wrap between the legs and over the legs and just had to build up a lot of bulk. So his, if you will, butt area of the doll actually ended up really, really stiff. And his legs almost feel like they've got wire in them because his legs are almost posable now. But yeah, and then here we go, just finishing up the body, which is a lot more difficult than it sounds, just because covering all of this white up took a lot more yarn than I ever would have imagined. And then just building up the bulk of his body so that he actually looked like Yarny and not just some creepy voodoo doll. And then I went ahead and had to leave, of course, to go get my tweezers so that I could pull through a little tail for him. Because Yarny is not complete without his tail. As soon as I finish his hip stuff up, of course, because that took a good amount of time. And then here we go, pulling through his tail. And then I went and stitched that down just to make sure that it wouldn't move or come undone. You know, if I were to send this to somebody or let my 2-year-old goddaughter play with him, wouldn't want him just coming completely unraveled. And then I went ahead and squished him and made sure all of the yarn was in place, and there you have Yarny before his eyes. And now you have his eyes, which I just kind of made little hot glue dots and wrapped white yarn around. I was going to go ahead and sew them down with some white thread so that they looked a little bit more part of his body, like his eyes in the game look like they're wrapped through pieces of the yarn, but hot gluing them down was just much easier. And so there you have Yarny. Well, there you have it. Finished Yarny. And he's all plush and squishy and adorable, and you can hold him and play with him, or give him to a kid to play with, set him on a shelf, or he can watch you play Unravel. Which I will go ahead and leave a link in the description box down below for you guys, if you guys are interested in playing that game. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, or at least found it useful. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give it a like. Subscribe for more would be awesome. Leave a comment on tips if you made it Yarny plush that you think that other people should know that I didn't mention. Thanks again, guys. This is Nyxarity signing off. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.